Hello and welcome back to AC's Make and Repair. Well, today I'm going to continue what I would call the series on handle making. Today we made a little handle for a tack hammer. I had this head lying around the shed here, and as promised I said I was going to show you different handles to make for different tools. I made my handle long and slender. So come along with me, I'll show you how I made it from a blank piece of timber through to this handle that you see before us. Okay, so here's one that I am going to roughly copy the length of. I find this a comfortable length for me. You might find it shorter, comfortabler. It's up to you what style of handle you make. I'm just going to show you the basics of how I do a little handle like this for this type of tack hammer. I've got several other types of heads. This is an old Farrier's hammer head. One day I'll get around to putting a handle on that. It had a steel, somebody had welded a handle in it before, so I cleaned that up, got rid of that, and one day I'll get around to putting a handle on that. That's, like I say, a Farrier's hammer head. That's for putting horseshoe nails in horseshoes, and this is what they twist or clench the end of the nail off with, and when they put it in, and then they flatten it out on the hoof with that type of hammer. And I've got several other styles of tack hammers too, as you can see there, that one day need a handle in them. So today I'm going to put a handle in this one here. It's a little bit different style to the one I have. I have another one identical to that there, like that there. Don't know what brand it is, wouldn't have a clue. It's quite a good little tack hammer though. I've used them for years like that. Got several heads I'm going to show you guys over time what sort of handle I usually put in them. I'm going to show you a basic claw hammer handle that I do too. Alright, let's get into it. So I've already got a piece of timber that I machined up. This was just an offcut. This is some spotted gum. As you know, I love spotted gum. Brilliant for hammer handles, I find. So I've got this little piece here. Grainy orientation on a little tack hammer. It's not so crucial. It's not like a sledgehammer or an axe handle or anything like that. It's not like you're levering 10 ton of pressure off it, so or under high impact. So what I'm going to do is I've machined it down to a thickness. This is roughly 7/8 thick or 22 millimeters thick, and it is roughly, it's about an inch. Well, it's an inch and not just under an inch and a quarter, or just under 30 millimeters by roughly 22. And it will taper down like this one too. If you can see that, it will taper down like that too. So I'll show you how I do that now. So the first thing I do is roughly get a length. I always make oversize for a starter. So I'll allow about half an inch over on the head end and about 3/4 over on the tail end. And I'll cut that off and I'll come back and show you how I mark it out. So on this particular handle here, it runs parallel to about here. At this point, from this point to this point runs parallel, and then it tapers down. It tapers down to roughly around about 3/4 of an inch thick or 19 millimeters thick at that point, and then it'll broaden out again at this end. I like to actually work it according to this head, so it has to go broader than that inside point. I'll go and knock that out now, that old handle out now, and there's a circular wedge in that. Somebody's put a bit of tubing in there. I'd say that's factory done, and I'll knock that out now. So I've done that. I've cleaned up that head, taken out the old wedge. It was a cylindrical wedge actually. I've never seen one like it before. It was a cast cylinder with little wedge non-return spikes on the side of it. I didn't realise, and when I punched it out, I squeezed it in the vise to just break off a bit of timber, and it broke the wedge. A bit of a shame really. Would have liked to use it again. Would have liked to have seen how it was really made. The brand is an Arams Good Line. It could have been a cheap hammer, I don't know. It's a good little head though, I know that much. So the next thing I do, so I know the end of my handle, I want it roughly 30 millimeters or roughly 1.25 inches wide. Now, in the top section, the way I determine this, is I know that's going to be roughly 7/8 or 22 millimetres by roughly 14 or 9/16, and then I know the depth of it. We're looking at it, so I'll allow about 2 inches or 50 millimetres. So I'll allow that at the top. But the way I determine how wide to make it before it goes down to the 22 or the 7/8 is by this. I measure that thickness there. You only needed that width there because you don't know what's slipping down the handle. So that is also, that is about 27. So I would say that's about an inch and just over an inch it is, okay? So I'll put a centre line through, mark it 15 millimetres at both ends. Uh, 30 millimetres at this end because I know I want it roughly 30 millimetres wide at the base end. And at the top end, I wanted it roughly, I'll go 28 just to be on the safe side, and that makes it easier for me to measure out. So 28. So I'll measure off the centre line. So I'll get 14 millimetres either side. And that gives that part. Then I'll put a centre line in here, straight up the centre, and that'll mark, then I'll be able to mark in this thin section here, if you can see what I'm talking about there. Thin section there, so just put that centre line through. You probably can't see the centre line through. The pencil doesn't show up on this light that good. Okay, so I roughly want it to run parallel, so I'm going to make a base mark. There's a base mark there. I want it to run parallel, I'm guessing. So it runs parallel for roughly 4 inches or 100 millimetres, and then I'll put a mark there. So it runs parallel from there to there. Square that mark across, so I know. These are only guides, by the way. Yep. Of course, that's my base mark there. Just mark that too. Then I step down to my narrow point, which is about here, and then I go up to my thickest point about there. So my narrow point, which is about here, I'll put another square mark across, and I knew that was about 3/4 of an inch. So I measure out, in my case I'll go to 20 millimetres because that's easier, because by the time I sand it back. Now from this point here to that point there, I simply just taper it off. Like that. Put a slight pencil mark in it. You don't have to do what I'm doing. You can make the taper long and slender. It's totally up to you. The lighting is not that good here at the moment, this time of day. It's late in the afternoon. So I don't know if you can see that. So there you go. That's how I've roughly done it for that part. Now, up at the head end, which is up here, so the head's going to go up here like that. If you can see that. I might just zoom in a bit. Okay, so my head goes roughly there, and I go out to my fattest point there, which was 28 millimetres again. So you'll have something like that from down this end, which is your handle, belly's in the middle, and then it'll go up to the head sort. So you should have, from this is your head end here. This part goes in this part, the hole like that. So it goes in there like that. Okay, some of this will be waste. Then we cut it down to that sort of the lady's waist there, then belly it out, and then parallel it out towards the end of the handle up there. And I use the side of the board as the edge of my handle. Yeah, that is the side profile. So this is the head end. It widens out. Then it narrows in at the middle of the handle, and then it widens out again at the base or the hand grip end. Okay, so here we go cutting it now. I try to go as close as I can to the line, keeping it as neat as possible. So I take my time. Okay, that's a rough shape of our handle. Just zoom out a bit so you can see what I mean. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is tape the offcuts back on. You can see the marks from the middle of the handle. I line them back up and I tape it back on so it sits nice and square. Alright, so I've taped it up as you can see. So it's a square piece of timber again with all the offcuts stuck back in there. Quite a simple procedure. I find centre again on the edge this time. So I find centre again. Once I've found centre, I mark centre all the way along. Right to the end. Okay, so can you see that? I'll zoom in. Same sort of setup as last time. Tapers out. The head sits like this, that way. There, so basically sits that way. So it goes there like that. Tapers out, goes down, and the belly narrows down. Then of course goes parallel at this end here, and up this end is the end of my handle there roughly. Just a rough estimate, okay. Alright, so I take that to the saw now and I cut that out. Okay, now you could use a bandsaw to cut this out. Alternatively, you could cut it out. If you had a wider stock, you could cut it out with a jigsaw. But you need wider stock if you're going to use a jigsaw to do it out of. You could cut it out. You could actually use some sort of spoke shave and spoke shave that down. Many years I spoke shaved handles down. I just find that you can get the quick amounts away. You could use a little scroll saw even if you've got a good little scroll saw to do this sort of work. I use this pattern saw because it's nice and slow. It's an old jigsaw type of pattern saw. You can take your time. You don't usually make mistakes. You can be rather accurate with it. So let's cut them down now. Same process as before. sand that last bit. Alright, I'll leave that on and I'll sand that edge to that line now. See how that is not quite on the mark there, I'll just sand that back now. Now I'm fortunate enough or blessed enough to have one of these sanders. So what I'll do now is just quickly touch up those couple of spots. Alright, so once you've made your handle like this and you've done your sanding back and you've got your profiles right, like we see here, then it's time to choose a round over bit, because we're going to do most of this on the router here, and you choose a round over bit that suits the handle. So you want a round over bit where this part of the round over, the top flight is there, but the bearing is not over centre. So this is probably a radius of probably something like 1/2 inch or something like that. And this one's probably 5/16 or something like that. But the 1/2 inch is a fraction too big. On this part of the handle it goes over quite well, but when you get here it'll be hardly beveling the corner. But this little one, we'll try it first, and I'll set the bearing up so it runs centre all the way through to about here. We stop here round over about here. Okay, so we'll do that now. I've set it up so this part of the flight, this part of the flight here is level with the top of the table. Alright, let's do it and see how it goes. Alright, it's not too bad. Alright, so we've rounded over this part here, but I wasn't really happy with the round over on this portion here. So what I've done is I've raised the bit a little bit, and I'll run it from about here through to about here somewhere. I won't go too far up there because it'll dig in like it did on that last one, and that way it'll round that part over a little bit more. I was thinking about putting it in the lathe and just giving it a spinner and taking it down with some sandpaper, which would have done the job too. But if this doesn't work, I'll do that then. Alright, definitely did round it over a bit better, and I'll just give that a bit of sand up now. I actually might just throw it between centres. Like this is the waste here, so I'm going to cut this part off in here. So I'll put it between centres on the lathe, makes it easier for me to sand it in here. I'll do that right now. Alright, that's rounded the corners up nice and neatly. Very neatly actually. I have actually turned them in the lathe before and just knocked the corners off in the lathe. And it doesn't do too bad a job really. It's a little bit more of a greater radius. And on these parts it's not too bad either. But nevertheless, I find the router method works quite well. And most blokes out there don't have a lathe. I only just sand it in here because I do. You can just alternatively just sand it by hand like this and get your profiles right like this, and it works quite good just doing it like this. So I'll move over now and we'll make sure the head fits right. And then I'll cut the wedge slot, fit the wedge, and we'll see how we finish it. Alright, we're going to test fit the head now, and we do that by firstly I wriggle the head on. It's a fairly good fit, believe it or not, straight up. So what I'm going to do now is drive it on, and you do that by hitting this end of the handle. That, believe it or not, is actually driving it on. So I'll keep driving that on to see if it'll come through. Okay, so obviously we're a little bit tight at that point there, so I'll just sand that down a bit, just at that point, and we'll get it close to being right. Okay, I've sanded that a bit more. Yeah, some of you might be, excuse me, some of you might be querying how I drove that out. I had a little block of wood, put that down in there, put that edge on something rigid, held the other edge, and I drove it out with another hammer. And I try to take note of the orientation, the front and the back, because sometimes heads are moulded bad. This one's actually tight in the middle, this head, so that's what's been causing our problem. So I've sanded it back quite a bit more. I'll just get the hammer and drive that on again. Alright, as you can see, that's driven on really well, and it's nice and square. I always check it for how square it is. So what I'll do now is I'll actually put a mark on that, just there somewhere. I'll cut the excess off, and I'll cut a wedge groove down about there somewhere. I'll do that right now, and I'll cut a wedge while I'm at it too. So I'll cut that off square there, roughly, cut down about an inch or so, and then I'll make a wedge up to suit. Alright, I just thought I'd show you how I cut that off and how I cut the slot for the wedge. You don't have to use a bandsaw, you can put this on a vise like that and cut the slot dead plumb, dead parallel with the sides, down the depth you need with the handsaw, tenon saw or hacksaw even. Then you have to cut your wedge. I've got a bit of an offcut off the same piece of timber. As you can see, it's the same thickness, and I'll use, sorry about that, I'll use that. Okay, firstly, to keep the slot nice and plumb, I use a block of wood slideways like that to hold it up against. This is a nice square edge. That keeps it nice and square through there. If you try to do it freehand, you have the tendency to go like this, and it can go to plumb. So I'll cut the end off first, the excess off first. I will be cutting some more excess off at the end, but I'll show you how I do this part first. Cut that off. Go to centre. There's your cut. While I've got that going, I'll cut a small wedge. It's going to be a thin taper. Rightio, so that's a thin wedge. I'll sand that down on the disc sander, or if you've got a belt sander, use the belt sander. Okay, so we've cut our wedge, and I've made the end of that wedge so it starts tapering off from that point, and I've made it slightly fatter at this end. Only slightly. You don't need it 2 or 3 mil bigger. You only need it probably 1 mil bigger at the most by the time it gets down into there. So by the time it should hit the bottom, it should be squeezing the top apart, so it's locking the head in. I've put a mark to show the front of the head. I slide that in. Now I drive the hammer home. Okay, as you can see, it's coming down nice and tight on that. Right, okay, now we're going to drive that wedge home. if I can. I might put it on something more solid. Alright, got it on something more solid. Now line that wedge near. Okay, we've got it started. There we go, driven home nice and neat. Now what I'm going to do with the bandsaw, carefully cut around that to the profile, and then I'll take it to the disc sander, and I will, once I've taken it to the disc sander, I will flush it off at the top of the head so it's nice and neat with the top of the head, and then I will put another wedge in this way. Alright, I've cut a very light gauge wedge out of a little bit of light gauge steel. I didn't have any proper wedges, so I made one up. And I'll drive that home in the head there of this hammer now. I'll try to get it central if I can. That centre there. And there you have it in the head. That's pretty flush too. I won't even need to grind that back. Head's nice and square on the handle. Sometimes if you don't do this part right, the head will be out of square with the handle. All I've got to do now is cut this handle down to length and just sand lightly at the end of the handle. I'll do that now. Alright, that's more than enough. Give the handle a bit of a light sand while I'm at it. And I'll put some coating on that now. Alright, so I've got some, it's called hard wax oil, but it's basically linseed oil mixed with a bit of stain. I got it on clearance at a hardware store, but it's good for this sort of stuff. It's non-toxic. It's good for just sealing a handle. It's got a bit of a dark stain to it, but that doesn't bother me. It's only a hammer handle. Right, thanks for joining me today as we made this little tack hammer handle. Of course, you might have a different design and shape that you want to do for your hammer head. Of course, it has to suit your head that you're trying to make a handle for. Like I said, I will make other videos to cover other types of handles for tools and hammers that you might have. You can also make this using basic hand tools. I showed you using machines, but you could use a jigsaw to cut out the profile of this. You can use rasps and spoke shaves to shape it down rather than a router and sand it back with sandpaper. These things are able to be done quite easily with hand tools. I use the machinery because I've got it, but I do enjoy using hand tools too. So thanks for joining me on this one. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed, that is. And please share me with your friends. I'd appreciate that. Really would appreciate that. There's that little share arrow down below there. Feel free to share me with your friends if you wouldn't mind. There is also that playlist on handles I told you about at the start of the video. Feel free to click on that. I'm adding to that, and I will continue to add to that, and that might be a help to you. All right, thanks for joining us, and bye for now.